The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is being hosted by LEDS GP, and it's featuring the USAID RALI Resources to Advance LEDS Implementation Project and the efforts by the Government of Colombia to harmonize NDC and harmonize greenhouse gas accounting between mitigation activities and national inventories for NDC tracking. So I am Dorina Mann. I'm with the RALI project, and I will be moderating today's webinar. If you're not already on mute, I would like to remind everyone to please put themselves on mute, just so that we can keep background noise to a minimum. In today's webinar, we will have presentations by Amanda Valenta from USAID, Marian Van Pelt from the RALI project and ICF, and also a featured presentation by Sebastian Carranza and Camila Rodriguez from the Colombian Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, or MADS. Before we jump into the presentation, I just want to give a short plug for the Leadership Compact, a partner program of the LEDS GP. This is a partnership of 12 countries that are leaders in advancing economic development through low carbon solutions. The Leadership Compact focuses technical support on design and implementation of policies, measures, and actions that enable compact countries to unlock private investment and business partnerships to achieve these priority climate and development goals. The partner countries include Colombia, who is being featured today, as well as Mexico, Peru, Jamaica, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, Senegal, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Malawi, Kenya, and Morocco. In today's presentation, we'll be just giving a short introduction of the RALI project, reviewing the transparency needs under the Paris Agreement and why the work that we're featuring today is relevant. We'll be passing the mic over to Sebastian and Camila to talk about Colombia's experience in moving from Kyoto to Paris, and then strengthening and harmonizing greenhouse gas tracking. And we'll give a brief overview of the actual harmonization framework that was applied in Colombia and the SINGE prototype, so the greenhouse gas data management platform that was prototyped and developed for Colombia. And at the end, we'll review some questions. You're all welcome to raise your questions throughout this webinar by typing them into the chat box that is on the right-hand side of your screen. So I'd like to pass the mic over to Amanda Valenta, and she will take the presentation from here.
Thanks, Dorina. Hi, everybody. This is Amanda Valenta. I am an energy specialist for the U.S. Agency for International Development, and I manage the RALI program, which is currently working to implement some of this MRV work with Colombia that you'll hear more about in a couple of minutes. So just to start off, I wanted to introduce the RALI program and give you a little bit of background. Dorina, if you could go to the next slide. So RALI stands for Resources to Advance LEDS Implementation. It's a centrally funded USAID program implemented by our wonderful partners at ICF to provide robust technical assistance on the implementation of low emission development strategies. And right now we have an increasing focus on building capacity for monitoring, reporting, and verification, or MRV, and GHG inventories. And the program is currently implemented by ICF. They bring a wealth of knowledge to this, including 20 years of direct GHG inventory experience, a host of globally recognized experts, and a lot of in-house expertise on training, capacity building, and IT experience, which made them well suited to work with Colombia on the work that I'll talk about in a moment. So, Dorina, next slide. Our work in RALI falls into 3 key categories. The first is the CLEAR tool, which is the Clean Energy Emissions Reduction tool. This helps partner countries to estimate emissions reduced from clean energy projects and policies. The second piece is NDC implementation support via global goods like the NDC toolbox. We developed this toolkit essentially is an online clearinghouse of all of the existing tools out there that can help partner countries implement their NDCs. And then the third piece is technical assistance and best practices. So one of the components of this is what we're calling the RALI series, which is a series of practice-based case studies, tools, and innovative new approaches to low emission development that highlight our work and global best practices in the field. And the final piece of this is technical assistance, which is direct technical assistance to partner countries working to implement their NDCs. And that's where our current work in Colombia came from. Next slide. Thanks, Serena. So our work with Colombia has been an 18-month engagement, which began in January 2017, and we're working on two key work streams, which Camila and Sebastian will talk a bit more about in the context of Colombia, and then Marian Van Pelt will go into much greater detail as well. But the first piece was technical MRV support. The goal here was to help Colombia come up with a method to harmonize their activity level mitigation data with their national inventory work stream. So RALI came up with a 6-step harmonization framework to do just that, and we piloted it in 2 priority sectors for Colombia, including renewable energy and their cattle sector, NAMA. The second piece was more IT focused. So we worked with key stakeholders in Colombia to design a central IT platform prototype that would harmonize and aggregate GHG emission data and reductions from mitigation activities into one central place. So the goals here really were to help Colombia harmonize their data at the top down and bottom up approach. So harmonizing the activity data on the ground with the national inventory data, to help institutionalize the inventory processes and the harmonization processes, and third, to really just increase efficiency when it comes to the inventory process, to help Colombia track progress toward their NDCs, to respond to Paris Agreement requirements, and ultimately the enhanced efficiency. The goal is to save time and money during those the inventory processes. So we worked very closely with the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, or MADS, and their Institute of Hydrology, Meteorology, and Environmental Studies, as well as our USAID mission in Colombia and some other key stakeholders, both in country and internationally. And the engagement really proceeded in 4 key pieces, starting with a technical analysis of the current state of MRV and inventories in Colombia. Then we worked on the technology development of that IT prototype. We worked on the harmonization, which I mentioned, and the pilot projects for renewable energy activities and the cattle sector, NAMA, and then ended just last week with some capacity building. And we've also participated alongside our Colombian government counterparts in several international conferences to share best practices and the work that Colombia is doing in this space. And again, Camila and Sebastian will talk more about that, and Marian will go into greater detail as well. So just to step back a couple of paces and put this work into the global context of transparency and the requirements under the Paris Agreement, I'll just take a couple of minutes here, starting with the Paris Agreement and MRV. So the Paris Agreement requires countries to set increasingly ambitious mitigation targets, emissions targets within their nationally determined contributions. And meeting these targets requires an established measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verification system for GHG emissions. And it also requires bottom-up sectoral compliance data for national programs. So there's a bit of a catch-22 here, though, because the exact MRV requirements under the Paris Agreement are still under development. So we have a whole host of countries who are working to make progress on their NDCs and to track their data, while the agreed-upon system for doing that is not quite in place yet. And that's kind of where the problem, or the challenge, or the opportunity, depending on how you look at it, comes up. So if we look at this next slide, to dive a bit deeper into that, we know that many countries have committed to reductions relative to their business as usual scenario. And we know that national inventories will likely show increasing emissions, while the mitigation activities that are happening on the ground should show emissions reductions. But the challenge here is harmonizing those two. So countries have to harmonize mitigation MRV with the national inventory process. And that's that key crux that I was mentioning a couple slides ago, figuring out how to make sure that all of the great mitigation work on the ground in country is actually being accounted for and captured from that top-down national inventory data. So from our work, we've learned that harmonization of the top-down and of the bottom-up and top-down data can help alleviate this problem, which is where the harmonization approach that we've developed came from. And also having a central system to aggregate that data can drastically improve the GHG inventory process and the harmonization efforts, which is where the Singhay platform for Colombia came in and the prototype that we designed. So that's just a bit on the global context. With that, I will turn it over to Camila Rodriguez and Sebastian Carranza, our wonderful counterparts in Colombia's Ministry of Environment, to talk a bit more about Colombia, the context of Colombia as a whole, and the work that they're doing as they are really emerging as global leaders in this field.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Amanda, for this presentation. First of all, we would like to thank all the people engaged on this webinar, the people from the LEDGP, USAID, ICF, and well, thank you very much for your support and for the people also attending this webinar. Next slide, please. Serena. Well, we'd like to just introduce the context of the climate change management and the climate change policy implementation in Colombia. There is many things happening at this time in our country, and many of these things happening here are related with information management and the importance to build robust and transparent reports. Colombia at this time is implementing its green growth strategy. We are engaged with the Paris Agreement implementation as part of our as a general framework for our NDC. Colombia has also, as the SDG policy implementation, we have been accepted for the OECD 2 months ago, and as a general context, we have a peace implementation process happening at this time here in the country. So all of these policy context events happening in Colombia demand a huge effort to build clear reports and to inform everyone inside of the country and outside of the country about the environmental management in Colombia. Next, please. Well, specifically for climate change in Colombia, we have an institutional arrangement. We have an intersectoral commission for the climate change management. In this commission, all the ministries engaged on the implementation of the NDC are part of this committee. We have 9 regional nodes for the action at the territorial level. We have a technical committee for the intersectoral commission. We have a finance committee, foreign affairs committee, and an information committee. All the information management and the MRV issues are managed from the information committee. So it is important to show that it is necessary to have clear institutional arrangement to manage the information for climate change. And this is the reason why at this time we have this arrangement. This is guideline that is coming from the president, and this information committee is integrated by many institutions around the country, universities and civil society also. Next one, please. Well, I would like just to talk a little bit about our NDC goal. Colombia has in its NDC a commitment to reduce 20% of its emissions by 2030. The period of implementation is 2020 till 2030, and this 20% is a reduction calculated from our BIU, our business as usual scenario, and we hope to reduce the 30% with external support. This is our commitment on climate change. We hope to have a reduction of 60 million of tons by the 2030 from our BIU scenario. So even if this is a commitment only for the 2030 year, we hope to build clear arrows reports in the period of implementation. So the MRV approach at this time in Colombia is we hope to have all the tools, and we hope to be ready to start the tracking of the implementation of this of the NDC before the 2020. So that's the reason we have been working from the last 3 years, and we hope to have all the key elements ready to put in place by the beginning of the next year. And that's the reason why we have been working with this cooperation projects, not only USAID, but many other cooperation agencies. So next, please. Well, this is a message that we would like to share with all the participants here. We are working from this approach, moving from the Kyoto information management approach. We understand as a non-Annex 1 country in this protocol that we had a kind of commitment with the tracking of projects and a very small scale with the calculation of these kind of indicators to track the implementation of specific projects like the CDM. But this is the past. Now we are moving to the new climate regime, and this is an important message for all the developing countries. It is important to think about the new information management approach, information management approach to communicate the results of the NDC tracking and the NDC implementation and the accomplishment of the goals inside of our NDCs. It is also important to have an idea about how to track the implementation of policies, not only actions, not only projects. We have many policies and regulations putting in place to the accomplishment of our NDC. So it is important to think our information management system in the transparency framework for the Paris Agreement. So we have been working also not only in these technological platforms, we have been working in the developing of accounting rules. We have been working on the proposal for a general legal framework, and even on these technological tools. So all of those key elements are important to be ready to start up robust information management system to track the NDC, and this is our approach. And next, please. About our national climate change policy, we have many strategic lines. We have 5 specific lines to put in place our policy in the territories and in the economic sectors. But the important thing of this slide is the support line in information and science, technology, and research. The information committee and the MRV approach are included in this strategic, in this support line. We have been working with many other national institutions to put in place this support line and the policies and the regulation related to it. It is also important to remark that we have been thinking about information related to the rural development, the urban development, the energy and mining development, the infrastructure, and the ecosystem management. So there is a lot of information from many different sectors with many challenges inside of the use of the data coming from these different scopes, and we have been promoting this support line as an strategic and a key message for our cooperation projects and our stakeholders in the national government. Next, please. Well, as part of the means of implementation, this is important issue to be linked with other scopes like the South-South cooperation. We understand that it is important to share our views, our concepts, our questions, our problems with other countries like Colombia. It is important to raise our points, to understand our challenges at the technological or political level. There's many challenges also in the coordination of these information management systems. It is not easy to put in place these kind of tools. We have been working from the last 2.5 years with many national institutions here in Colombia, and at this time we need to continue moving forward in this coordination process. It is not easy. It is required to have a clear legal framework to do so, and it is also necessary to have a clear financing source to put in place these tools. The technological transfer and the new mechanisms, all the things that are just being discussing at the negotiation levels, are very complicated to understand for our institutions. So there is a huge challenge to understand what is happening in the negotiations, how to implement those decisions in our country. So means of implementation is one of the more important subjects to put in place in developing countries, to understand where we're going and to understand what we do have to do to raise our points with similar countries than Colombia. Next one, please. Well, this is just a general approach of the price agreement implementation in Colombia. We have specific goals in adaptation and in mitigation. So it is also important to remark that we're not only looking for information about emission reductions or removals. We are looking for information about the reduction of vulnerability and the measure and evaluation of mitigation actions in many economic sectors. So this is another huge challenge. Normally the world is, or normally we have a kind of experience to find the right information for mitigation actions and to track this performance, but in adaptation, it's quite difficult. We are building indicators, we are building the protocols to build our communications and reports in adaptation, and our information systems are also taking into account those needs in adaptation. And next one, please. Well, this is just a general view of what we did from the last 4 years as part of this government that is ending this year. We have all the institutional arrangement that that I already talked. We have an implementation of the climate change policy at the regional levels through our regional nodes. We already have a law for the ratification of the Paris Agreement, and we have a general climate change law approved by our Congress. We have a carbon tax put in place. We have the first version of our national emissions reduction registry. And we are finishing the first regulation for MRV in Colombia. So there is many outputs from this administration. At this time, we are starting the discussions with the new administration. As many countries in Latin America, we are changing our presidents this year. And this is another challenge, just to be sure that the new administration is informed and engaged with the commitments that we have internationally, and promoting the tools, promoting the policies, and promoting the decisions that we already made in order to have robust information systems and useful tools to communicate our performance in climate change. Next one, please. Well, just before to pass the word to my colleague Camila, I would like to introduce the three general points of this cooperation with ICF, RALI, and USAID. Is the design of our national inventory, national GHG inventory system as a web platform. The MRV harmonization. This is the harmonization required between the mitigation actions and our inventory. And finally, a prototype and user experience with a lot of feedback from many stakeholders in Colombia about this platform. Next one, please. Well, I would like just to pass the word to Camila Rodriguez, who is here with me and is part of our MRV team in the Ministry of Environment.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Marian and Sebastian, for your presentations and your words. So I would like to continue explaining the work that we have been doing with the RALI project in Colombia for the last 2 years. There has been a lot or a very good bilateral collaboration between the technical groups. And we have been working a lot on our MRV system, as Sebastian mentioned, the national context, and all the things that are happening right now in the world about climate change and in Colombia. Not only about climate change, but the peace agreement and the OCDE and the SDGs required a better coordination for the information processes in the country. So not only from the climate change direction, but from all the ministries, I think we have been improving our work around the information management. So this is why this project is so important for the climate change coordination of information right now for us. We know also that we have new commitments framed by the Paris Agreement, for example, the biennial reports. So these new commitments require from us a better capacity, and not only to understand and to implement all the climate change action in the country, in the sectorial level and in the territorial level, but also to track how these implementations have been put in place in those levels, and how to track our NDC as an aggregate, how to which are the main elements of our NDC tracking progress. So one of these main elements is the national GHG inventories in the country, and the other one is the mitigation actions that we have been implemented in a several levels. Also, some of them have a national scope and have some national government institutions involved, and others actions are, for example, implemented by private actors in the country. So it is very difficult for us to harmonize all this information in a coherent and a robust tracking progress system of our NDC. So this is why we have been working in this 6-step approach with the RALI project, which the first step is about to identify the GHG effects and to map the causal chain. We are show some few examples about this work with the 2 pilots that we have been implemented in Colombia, but the importance of this first step is to understand how the mitigation actions can impact or not the GHG national inventory. And then we see like the effects in the specific inventory sectors. So in Colombia, there is a lot of work about how to appropriate the climate change information within the strategic stakeholders in the country. For example, we all know that our countries have to present the national GHG inventory disaggregated by 4 main categories that the IPCC have this defined, but this is like as easy to understand for other stakeholders in the country which are not related with climate change processes. So what we have been trying to do is to close like this information for our main sectors in the country, trying to explain in our reports, for example, the homologation between the IPCC categories and the economic categories of the country, so they can understand which are these effects in the inventory sectors. Then the third step is about the bottom-up and the top-down approach. So we know that we have a lot of information for the calculations of our national GHG inventory, which are top-down approximations or top-down data sources. So we know, for example, how many fuel are we using in each of the sectors, and this is one of our main information sources for the GHG inventory. But also, each of these specific sectors have a specific information about how they are consuming all these fuels. So we have a lot of bottom-up information coming from the sectors about emissions and also about their mitigation actions that they are putting in place in this in the frame with a frame by the national arrangements that Sebastian already mentioned and showed. Then we need to identify the needs to harmonize this information in the accounting system of the tracking process of our NDC. So what is or what are our priorities in the country for this harmonization? We know that we can make huge efforts and spend a lot of money in very, very complicated information systems, but for what? How far would like to go about this information management? What will be like useful for us, and what will be like okay, this is too many information, and maybe we can now manage right now all these things. So we need to prioritize some processes and some sources and some mitigation actions for this harmonizing accounting process, and then prioritize also the improvements that we need to address in our information systems. So Colombia have been working a lot, for example, in framed by the process in the improvement of the environmental information systems. So in this process, we have identified that we have like more than 40 sub systems of information about different topics in the environmental sector. And we need to understand how to improve all these complicated schemes that we have been managed for the last 20 years about environmental information in the country. And we need to understand how climate change now comes to the country, begins a priority in the development process, and how to harmonize all these climate change information needs with all the existing information systems. So which are the main components of these information systems, and how to prioritize the improvements that we would like to address for the next years to reach our goals about or to address all our commitments about reporting in the Paris Agreement. And then, well, the sixth step is implement and harmonize all these things and all this information that we have been identifying a lot across the 5 steps. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the first point that Sebastian raised, we have been working in the design of the INGE web platform that strengthens the national capacities for the biennial reports under the Paris Agreement. So until now, we have been made our national communications about, I don't know, with almost 10 years between them. We wait for the country and the national institutions to have the capacities to actually calculate a national GHG inventory. So we knew that we cannot do it right now in a biennial periodicity, but this is a commitment now in the Paris Agreement. So part of our interest to work with the RALI team was to strengthen these national capacities to really have the capacity in our national institutions to have the specific reports that the Paris Agreement has included for the development countries also. And as we are so new in these information processes, this has been very valuable for us to have the first prototype of this tool, so the end users can prove it, can test it, and can feedback us and IDEAM about how to improve the first design of the system, and how to make it easier for our needs, and how to address the rest of the process for the systematization of the GHG national inventories in a better way. Next slide, please. So also we have been working with these 2 sectorial action pilots. I think the RALI team will go deeper in all this information. So I just wanted only to mention that we have been working in the livestock NAMA, and these are some examples, and in the renewable energy activities as sectorial projects. And these are only examples about the causal chain that we have been working on with the team. So what we need to know is how these actions in the yellow row, you can see, are impacting or not the national GHG inventory. Next slide, please. And it is also very important for us in the frame of these bottom-up and top-down harmonization approaches, not only about the information, but about the web platforms, to have a really harmonization and really articulation in between the current platforms that the national government have been working on. For example, the national mitigation actions registry that we have been working on for the last 2 years with the national GHG inventories, or this national GHG inventory system that really have helped us to design right now. This has been a lot of the work, also trying to understand the fields of information and how to how these two systems can communicate between each other and can feedback each other and can strengthen the use of the information for the taking decision processes about national climate change management in the country. I think I finish here. I don't know if Sebastian would like to add something.
I think also that we take too much time. Well, I just pass word to our colleagues from ICF. And yes, that's all from our side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Perfect. Well, this is Marian. I'll take it from here, Sebastian and Camila. Thank you both, first of all, for the work that you have done together with the RALI team, myself and our USAID colleagues, and making this project successful. I think it's been a really great example of cooperation that is leading to sort of sustainable outcomes. So we've been thrilled to be able to support you on your journey as you strengthen your full MRV and NDC reporting system, and I'm so happy to see that what we've done has been helpful and that it looks like Colombia is going to be able to move it forward from here. I also wanted to mention again that the work that USAID, both headquarters, which Amanda represents, and USAID Colombia have been instrumental in ensuring that we really fully had the understanding of what Colombia's needs were, and we articulated a very clear scope of work that was responsive to Colombia's needs, and we're able to design some things that are not only going to help position Colombia for its objectives, but also we hope through this webinar and through some other materials will be helpful to the global LEDS community. So thanks to all of you, and thanks for the tight partnership that this group has had, the RALI project, USAID headquarters, USAID Colombia, and the government of Colombia. I think it was a very successful project, and I'm proud to have been part of it. So I will just spend the next few minutes talking more specifically about the activities that we conducted. Camila just presented the overview of the harmonization process. We are working to publish some of this for all of you that are on the line and want to know more. We are going to be putting out some information that describes this harmonization process in more detail. But I'll go over it in a high level right now with the few minutes that we have remaining. Dorina, next slide, please. As everyone to date has mentioned so far, the activity streams that we conducted in Colombia were in two parts. One was to create and then adopt this harmonization process that Camila walked through a moment ago, to be able to harmonize the mitigation activities, MRV, with the national inventory, so that as the biennial reports are created every 2 years, the inventory accurately reflects the mitigation actions that have been taking place towards the NDC target. And then the second work stream that we did was create this inventory system. So SINGHE is the greenhouse gas emission inventory system. We developed a platform technology prototype and specifications that Colombia can use to help put forward a technology solution that institutionalizes their inventory, their institutional arrangements, their data archiving and data management, which will have a variety of concrete and helpful outcomes in strengthening Colombia's capacity to be able to report emissions accurately and transparently every 2 years, and also communicate well to the international community and within Colombia itself on sort of what information was used to create those emission estimates, and how they are moving forward on their improvement plans. So I'll walk through these two scopes briefly. Next slide. Under the RALI project and in cooperation with Colombia, we recognize this need to harmonize the MRV of mitigation actions and national inventories. And working under this project, we came up with this 6-step approach. And we were able to demonstrate a proof of concept with this approach in working together hand in hand with Colombia on the two activities that Camilla mentioned. One is their livestock NAMA, and the other is renewable energy. So what we did in these two pilots was to execute the analytical steps of this 6-step approach, which are steps 1 through 4. And I'll walk through those in more detail. And what we resulted in was 3 different products. One was some concrete recommendations for how to harmonize for these 2 mitigation projects and the inventory in Colombia. And then the third product is a general approach that Colombia can follow to harmonize the next suite of priority mitigation projects in country to ensure that those are reflected accurately in their inventory. Next slide. I'll walk through these steps one at a time. Step 1 really starts once a country has identified a mitigation action, a policy, NAMA, etc., that is significant within the country and they want to make sure is reflected in the inventory. Again, for Colombia, we decided the first 2 to look at were renewable energy and their livestock NAMA. And when I say that we piloted these, what I mean is that we looked through these various steps to see whether those mitigation actions are reflected accurately in the inventory, bottom-up inventory emissions that are created for the BER. And if not, what steps could be taken to ensure that those go on a path towards harmonizing so that nothing is either double counted or missed when comparing against the business as usual scenario and tracking towards the NDC target. So once a specific policy or action is identified, the first step is to map the causal chain of that process. And this really follows the GHG protocol's policy and action standard. So we did not reinvent the wheel in this case. We simply said that doing the approach identified by the GHG protocol is the first step of this process. So mapping the causal chain really means, as it's shown in this graph, to look through what the intended and possible unintended consequences or outcomes of a policy action might be. Often it could take a few stages to get to what the greenhouse gas emissions effect is of that activity. For example, if you create an energy efficiency policy, there might be the intended impact is to use less electricity, which lowers fossil fuel combustion or coal for electricity generation, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions of CO2 from fossil fuel combustion. But there might also be an unintended impact where people use more appliances that are more energy efficient, which could have an offsetting effect of using more electricity and thus increasing CO2 emissions from fossil fuels. So really unpacking the entire causal chain is the first step to understand how the mitigation policy interacts with emissions. Next slide, please. Our second step is really to start the harmonization. Once the causal chain is mapped of the policy or action, there will be a variety of greenhouse gas emission impacts, and those need to be mapped to the architecture of the IPCC, which is used for national inventories. In the example that I just provided, which was an energy efficiency policy that changed CO2 emissions from coal, the corresponding IPCC category would be CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion. And I've provided another example here on the screen. Many of those mappings can be intuitive or maybe obvious, but there are often areas that might be surprising when you map a full causal chain. For example, with our analysis for Colombia of a variety of mitigation actions with respect to the livestock NAMA. There were impacts within the AFLU sector as well as many others. And certainly anything in the energy sector that might intersect with biofuels would touch on the AFLU sector as well. So mapping those out very clearly is step 2 of our approach. Next slide, please. Once the impacts of the policy or action and the sectors of the inventory are identified for the mitigation action, it's time to unpack the methodologies used from both the bottom up and the top down to calculate the impacts of changes on those sources. In many cases, the bottom up assessment might be a specific MRV approach for a NAMA or something like a VCS or a CDM methodology. And that has its own methods, data elements, frequency of data collection, or resolution. At the national inventory level, the IPCC has the methodologies in place, but the country might be using a tier 1 or a tier 2 or possibly a country-specific tier 3 approach. And so looking to see what all of those data elements that are used for both the inventory and the MRV of the mitigation action is step 3. Our documentation that we created for Colombia and that we're going to be putting out into the global community includes some templates used to do this step, which can be one of the most complicated pieces of our approach. The next step, step 4, next slide, is to then really look to see where there might be disalignment and where there might be opportunities to change one or the other. So some examples are provided here. The data resolution might be different. I'm sorry, my slide is right. The tiers of analysis might be needing to be addressed, or the emission factors could be harmonized, or there could be splicing techniques that might be available to address these harmonization needs. As I indicated at the beginning of my presentation, steps 1 through 4 are really the analytical elements of this approach. And so those are the ones that we have done so far and that can be done in kind of a paper-based way and an analytical way. Next slide, please. So then comes sort of the country-specific work. So in our case, we handed the analysis over to Colombia, and it's up to them to figure out how to prioritize the recommended improvements within their inventory improvement plan or within the NAMA development process. So what we've had here, what we recommend in this stage is to prioritize improvements using a variety of methodologies. Some examples here include whether something is expected to play a significant role in reaching the NDC target, or maybe there are emission mitigation actions that are rather significant and need to be prioritized. Our final write-up of this will provide a variety of areas that can help you consider the prioritization of the improvements. Next slide, please. The final step is, as Camilla had mentioned, is really to implement and harmonize. Once an understanding is created of where there might be gaps or disharmonization between the MRV that happens at the mitigation stage or within the inventory, there are many opportunities to harmonize. Some of those include new institutional arrangements to create new data sharing agreements within new data providers. You might want to go to a new methodology, a higher tiered methodology, gather some new data, gather it more frequently. There's a variety of opportunities to harmonize. Some of them can be a high investment. Others might be very low investment, such as simply stating in a transparent way in the inventory and in the BER that there is a gap here where some information is not collected, and therefore the emissions presented within the BER are either over or underestimated. So that would be a zero cost option, to simply transparently state that you've done the analysis and there might be a gap. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and just say that those are our 6 steps. We've demonstrated this approach with our partners in Colombia and with USAID and USAID Colombia, and it seems to be working. So we look forward to the opportunity to present more information in a public way. We're going to be presenting some publications, as I said, with this process, some templates and examples. We're excited that Colombia is taking a leadership role by being the first to implement this and stepping forward as a leader in this space. So I'm going to take one more minute, and I'm sorry we're going over, to talk about the Singhe platform. The other specific advance we made together with Colombia was to create a greenhouse gas emission inventory data management platform. This is a simple screenshot because we did not want to take a long time today to show a full demo of this tool. But suffice to say, what we've done together with Colombia is to take their existing inventory management process that includes the data management from data providers, the analysis that's done by the inventory team, and many other specific elements of their IT architecture, and prepared a system, an IT platform and prototype that Colombia can now use to completely build out to manage their inventory system on this biannual requirement, as Camilla had indicated, needs to be done more frequently than in the past. And there are so many transparency requirements and other needs that Sebastian had indicated for why this inventory information and data management is important to communicate not only within the BER on the inventory, but also to speak technologically to align with the other data management platforms in countries, such as their mitigation registry and several other systems. So we've developed this, and it'll have several positive outcomes for Colombia in terms of smoothing the data management, providing additional QA/QC, supporting the inventory team through staff turnover and allowing them to have a strong record and foundation on which to apply each year's new inventory cycle or each iteration of the inventory cycle, building on the work that has been done in the past, which will allow the country to spend less time on some of the rudimentary activities that need to be done to spin up the inventory each cycle and allow them to invest their time in QA/QC, transparency, and inventory improvements. So we're excited to see where this one goes as Colombia moves forward to build this out. And we hope as well to provide some general information on what steps we took or what lessons we learned on this process to support global conversations of this type as well. So that is, I think, the end of my presentation, and I will turn it back to Dorina.
Great, thank you, Marian. And thank you everyone for staying with us right to 11. It's currently 11:04. We do want to take some time to take some questions at this point. I see some questions already in the GoToWebinar menu. Maybe just to start off, I do want to say or reiterate that this PowerPoint presentation and the webinar recording will be made available on the LEDS GP website in the coming days. So for anyone who needs to hop off now or who wants to go back through some of the content, I see that question came up a few times, that will be available. Perhaps we can take a few, I'm just scrolling through. I think there was a question from the audience about how folks can engage on as a RALI partner or with the RALI program. Perhaps, Amanda, do you want to take that question?
Sure, Dorina. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So am I understanding the question is how to become a RALI partner country?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, so we don't have a calculation or a formula necessarily for becoming a RALI partner country. I would just encourage you to, if there's something you think that RALI can engage with you on, and you've got questions or we can chat a bit more in detail, I would just encourage you to reach out to myself, Amanda Valenta, avalenta@usaid.gov, and we can explore some of the issues and whether or not a partnership would be a good fit.
Great, thank you. So perhaps I can pass a question to Marian. Fauzi, I'm sorry if I said your name incorrectly, asked a question about whether there are ways to check that reports submitted by countries are transparent. And Marian, I know you're part of some of these international processes, so perhaps you can speak to that.
I think that question is a bit above my pay grade, but I think that, there are a variety of processes within the UNFCCC to allow countries to work together to define a level of transparency. But I think that if I were to answer that question just based on my experience and my engagement in a variety of conversations of this type is the amount of transparency that's appropriate is the amount of transparency that you are able to provide. In many cases, an inventory or a national communication or a BRR lacks transparency simply because some information could have been explained a little bit better, and for whatever reason the report has not been written in a way that is perfectly clear in that space to a reviewer from another country. So I would just encourage any country to prioritize according to their needs. Certainly look into the inventory improvement plans for what algorithmic or methodology or data improvements you're interested in making. And then to my way of thinking, providing the international community what you do know about the accuracy and quality of your analysis, your opportunities for improvement, things you know you want to improve but haven't yet, uncertainty that you haven't been able to quantify but you know you want to talk about qualitatively. All of those things can help clarify the transparency of your reporting. But of course, the negotiations really nail this down, and I think we'll see some concrete examples moving forward coming out of the UNFCCC.
Great. I hope that starts to answer the question or at least touches on it. I see a couple of questions from David Lascano, particularly about the SINGE system. And the questions are whether the SINGE platform is intended to be informative only or an application that could perform calculations, and then about how the SINGE system would harmonize with the NDC. So are they using the same NCV or CO2 EFs? I don't know. Marian, would you want to speak to that again?
Start, and then Sebastian might want to dive in. The first question is this a data platform, and does it perform calculations? Yes, the intention is for this platform is as envisioned to create the calculations and do some automated quality assurance, quality control, and automate some data management processes. This does not get rid of the need for the inventory experts within EDM and MADS in Colombia or any other country that adopts an approach like this. But yes, it is intended to take as much of the burden and kind of the disharmonized processes and kind of use technology to bring harmony to both the data management and the archiving, the spreadsheets that tend to proliferate, et cetera, and put them all under one umbrella. In terms of how Colombia intends to use this for its NDC reporting, I think it would be more appropriate for Sebastian or Camila to answer that question.
Well, yes. About this question, is quite difficult to explain in a short time, but we were trying to put in the same page all the information management instruments that we already have available in the country, and we start with many mitigation actions that are linked with many different IPCC sectors, which is more difficult. We start to understand where is the link between specific mitigation actions and specific categories. And after that, we try to find the link between the categories and the economic sectors, just to be sure we are implementing policies or regulations or specific sectoral instruments to promote that mitigation action. So it is not a direct link between mitigation actions and categories. There is more analysis behind. It is necessary to understand pretty well the specific political conditions for every sector, and that's the reason why it is important to engage for example, the ministry who is promoting that mitigation action. We have been also working with the people engaged in the construction of the inventory. Normally in our country, those people are working in a Environmental Studies Institute, which is very scientific, which is very close, which has a very strong science approach, and normally they're so far from the political analysis. And try to put those conversations together is part of this harmonization exercise, and it's the same thing in the other way. It is not easy to talk about the construction of the inventory with the ministry or with the political partner, and we start to have this discussion. And after that, this is at the public sector, and after that, we engage the private sector. So we move from that discussion to, for example, a workshop with a specific subsector at the economy. Like, I mean, like the nitric acid production factories. There are 4 companies here, and we start the discussion with the Ministry of Industry, the Environmental Studies Institute, and the aggregation of that companies. And we start to understand the numbers behind our analysis, and we start to understand where are our mistakes, and how to have a clear understanding of the implementation of that mitigation action in that company, so how to reflect that reductions in the inventory through the implementation of a specific policy in that sector. So if we think this is just one of the many categories inside of the IPPU category, and try to do so in the whole categories of the inventory is a huge challenge, but that's our idea.
Great, thank you, Sebastian. I think we have time for one more question. I know that there are a number of other questions in the chat box. We thank you for your participation. We're happy to follow up offline over email if you want to reach out, and we can continue some of this discussion. So I think the last question we will try to tackle will be the one submitted by Felix about the case of Colombia and whether or not we looked into the extent that the harmonization had already happened. Perhaps, Marianne, would you like to take this one?
Yes, thank you. And I see some related questions about sort of examples of data management and harmonization. So I thought this question was a great one. How can you, to what extent can you identify whether the harmonization has already happened? In our case of the work that we did together with Colombia, one of the priorities that we identified was to evaluate was renewable energy. Now, in many cases, many countries, the energy data in country is some of the most robust data that is collected and available for the inventory team. And so in this case, when we did this harmonization approach to be able to determine whether renewable energy activities are accurately captured in the inventory and the BUR, we found that yes, it is for the most part. There's always areas for improvement, but it felt a little in the final analysis, it felt a little bit like we were simply checking a box, right? But it was a very important exercise to go through, because what we ultimately did was we were able to demonstrate in almost a proof, a mathematical proof sort of way, that this activity is accurately and robustly captured within the National Inventory Report. So I think that that's an example where the harmonization approach not only finds opportunities for harmonization, but is able to show where that harmonization is already happening, so that as you're doing, making policy decisions, looking at new opportunities for mitigation, tracking against your NDC target, knowing those areas that are robustly captured is just as important as knowing those areas where there might be gaps. And so that's one example, and I hope that answers your question, but we certainly did find that. And I think that there are some other questions in the Q&A box about this with respect to gathering and reporting data and looking through different types of examples. And what we found by following this process is that there's an analytical process that brings you through step 4 and shows where there might be harmonization gaps. And then from there, it's really up to whoever applies this approach to transparently communicate to the global community what is and is not captured, and then work within the country resources to be able to prioritize improvements as appropriate to country circumstances moving forward. So I hope that answers the question. And of course, as Dorina indicated, I think all of us would be more than happy to share additional experiences or answer specific questions, even though our time here today is up.
Great, thanks, Marian. So just a few concluding comments. I only had 2 jobs in this presentation. One was to click the slides, and the second was to remind everyone to respond to this GoToWebinar poll that's on your right-hand side. We'd greatly appreciate if you can give us some feedback on the webinar overall. Reiterating the theme from the last few minutes, you can find out more about the MRV harmonization process, about the RALI activities, and how to engage by clicking on checking out the website that's on the screen now, under climate links, and also reaching out with questions. So I put Amanda's email in the chat box for everyone's reference, as well as it's posted for all the speakers within this PowerPoint presentation, which will be posted to the Let's GP website in a few days. So with that, I want to thank our speakers, Amanda, Marian, Sebastian, and Camilla, to the Let's GP and Charlie for helping us organize, and thank you very much for joining us.